Welcome to the Goethe-Institut's event tonight here at the East Room. I'm very excited to welcome you all because this is actually the very first in-person event of the Goethe-Institut, full-fledged in-person event with an audience, with panelists and discussions, and hopefully your participation in that discussion later. And we are so happy to be back, and we are so happy to have you back. So welcome to our tonight's edition of the Goethe-Institut series In Conversation. In Conversation is our literature series. We are talking to authors from Germany and from Canada, sometimes in one panel, sometimes in different panels. We are talking to authors of fiction, but also sometimes to authors of non-fiction on subjects that are relevant to both of our countries and to both of our societies. We are very, very privileged to welcome tonight Cheluchi Onyemelukwe-Onuobia. And Cheluchi is documenting herself at the event. Cheluchi is the author of The Son of the House, which is already the winner of several international book festival and authors awards, among them the 2021 Nigeria Prize for Literature. The Son of the House is shortlisted for the 2021 Scotiabank Giller Prize and the Chinua Achebe Prize for Literature. Outside of writing, Cheluchi is a lawyer and an academic who specializes in health law and in gender law. She holds a doctorate degree from Dalhousie University. She is currently advocating for the decriminalization of attempted suicide in Nigeria. Cheluchi divides her time between Lagos and Halifax. Cheluchi is in conversation tonight with Lee Suksi. Lee is the author of The Nerves and winner of a 2021 LAMBDA Literary Award. They are at work on their first novel. So, Cheluchi, Lee, thank you so much for coming and joining us tonight. I invite you to the podium, please. Thank you.
So nice to be with you here, and thank you all for coming. As Nina just mentioned, the Son of the House has just won the Nigeria Prize for Literature, and you've been nominated for the Giller, which are the highest levels of literature in the two countries you've been spending the most time in the last decades. What does it feel like to be acknowledged at that level for your first novel in both places?
I think it's quite a bit surreal still, and very, very exciting. And, it feels like one is in a dream and you don't really want to wake up from it. Yeah, so terribly thrilling and humbling at the same time.
Yeah, that makes sense. It was like quite a journey for you. Like it is your first novel, and you said that you'd taken it various places. Tell me a bit about like your writing history before The Son of the House.
Okay,
because you've done so many things. Yeah. Like, where did the writing come in? What was your first writing like?
Okay, so I've always wanted to be a writer. I didn't always know that I wanted to be a lawyer, but I knew that I wanted to be a writer. From the age of about 7, I've actually always been writing. So I'm always happy when people read the book and they say it doesn't feel like a first novel. But again, I've been writing in some form or other for years, right? I wrote my first novel actually at 15, and I still have it. And so over time, I remember finishing secondary school or high school and about to get into the university, and I wanted to study literature and in Nigeria. And Yeah, I remember one of my uncles saying, "I don't care what your parents say. That's ridiculous. How are you going to pay your bills?" And really, that's what changed my mind. And I decided to read what I thought was the next best thing, something that had to do with words, and that's how I went into law. And then I went into law, and it, in a sense, sort of put my writing in abeyance for a bit. Didn't really write seriously until I finished university, did my master's, came here, did my master's at Dal, and then I kind of picked up writing again. So during my doctorate year, as well as doing my doctorate degree at Dal, I started writing. I actually wrote a novel then, which I still have, and which didn't really work out. And so, but I eventually said, you just have to keep pushing it, because that's you can't die without doing that. That's what you really want to do. And so after I finished my PhD, I decided, you know what, I'm going to try again. And that's how The Son of the House came to be. I'm working on my second novel now, and I've been really excited about how well this one has done. But I finished it, it took me about 18 months to finish. And then I shopped it around for 4 years. Just, sending out to agents, sending out to the publishing houses that would take books without an agent. And the answer was always no, no, no. So with literary prizes and being shortlisted for things, both internationally and, in Canada, in Nigeria, and then hearing yeses has been like, yeah, incredible, right? Because in fact, I remember my dad saying to me when I told him about the Giller nomination, when it was longlisted, he said, "Is it the same book?" Because he remembered me just, shopping it around, sending it continuously to different places. And I'm like, it's the same book. And it didn't actually change in any significant way, before it was picked up. So it's been quite the journey. But yeah, it's okay. Yeah.
You mentioned that you had another story beforehand, but I've also heard you talk about how this felt like the story that gave you the persistence to keep sharing it for 4 years.
So even the ones that I'd written before sort of had the same underlying themes, and I'm not going to give anything away. So hopefully you can buy. Anyway, so there was always there was always that drive to write about some of the kinds of things that come out in this book, and I just kept pushing it. I wrote short stories which got published during that time, but I even though I've played with the short fiction form, it's not really my dream has always been to write novels, right? So my short stories, especially those I wrote while I was doing my doctorate degree, were really like preparations for the big thing, for this big challenge, so to say, that I was going to take on.
It's very much a novel. I might give some things away,
Yeah,
but
that's fine.
None of the major plot points, because I want to talk about the book.
Yeah.
But it follows the story of two women who, at the very beginning of the novel, are kidnapped together, and they each tell their own stories in first-person narratives and discover a shared line. Yeah. But they come from very different class backgrounds. And there is so much, with what they discover between them, it is so much a novel of place and time. And then there are so many issues that are explored through their lives. But then there's also really very this sense of fate, and bringing those three things together, the setting, the very strong themes, and then a sense of things being out of their hands. They both have extreme agency, but there's also this question of this magic. And I wonder what your relationship to that fate piece is.
Okay, so it's interesting. Let me explain. Let me say something about this the framework, right? So when you guys hopefully will get to read the book, it's a book that's very much centered in a particular culture, in a particular time, like you say. But one of the things I really wanted to explore was the fact that when people work within a particular frame of reference, they can have agency, they can want to buck the system, but it's really hard. It's not the easiest thing, and that's what I really wanted to capture in this. That people can still be courageous even while they're, in a sense, not necessarily even fighting against the system, but trying to survive and maybe even thrive within the system. Now, in terms of fate and faith, right? Where I come from, we're very both religious and spiritual, and we believe that things can happen. And so I've heard people say, "Oh, there's coincidence as a plot device," and so on and so forth. But it's interesting that you would not find a Nigerian say that, for example, because we very much believe in things like that. And even with this book, I could tell you stories about very interesting things that have happened around it. So for example, I got my UK publisher, my Italian publisher, when I won the Sharjah Prize. They also won a prize, and I came down just by chance because I don't really have breakfast, and they were having breakfast, and they just walked up to me and they said, "Oh, it would be interesting to read this book," and they read it and they got in touch, and that's how it got published. And now one could think I just had a sense that I needed to go down that day, even though I don't have breakfast, and things like that. So where I come from, we don't dismiss those notions out of hand. We don't. We welcome them. We imagine that they will happen, and they do happen sometimes. And so I explore that in various ways in this book. But you also see, like I said, people working within a particular frame of reference and trying to, in a sense, survive within it.
Absolutely. Like that was what I was interested in.
Yeah.
Is like there's both a lot of resilience happening and then a lot of magic. Like
there's a lot of magic. Yeah. So it's interesting to me. There are things that people point out to you in your writing that you don't see. So I've been interested in. So if you look at the Giller citation, for example, it talks about magical elements, and I'm like, okay, so it took me a while to kind of take a deep breath and say, those things are, in a sense, normal to me. But yeah, maybe to somebody who lives outside of, the particular framework I'm talking about, it would be, magical, I guess. Yeah.
That's a really good answer. Yeah. Yeah. It's like, so I was also thinking like, Nwabulu in particular, like she experiences almost every form of violence while she's a child.
Yeah.
And then she goes on like to exhibit this incredible resilience, like past childhood, and work is this huge theme. Like she says later, like once she's made her sewing business, if there was more to life than work, it was work that was the foundation of everything. Yeah. And indeed, like the work ethic that was imposed upon her is what brings her out of grief, more so even than like establishing this new family. And you yourself are a lawyer, a professor, and like at work on these initiatives. Like, is that a principle?
For me?
Yeah.
That's interesting. I'm laughing because this afternoon, this afternoon I was having lunch with some of my classmates from DAL back almost 20 years ago, and some of us we hadn't met, in almost that time, And we were, talking about our lives, the different things we had done, the different paths we had gone down, and so on. And, so one of them was saying to me after we talked about, you were working, was actually saying to me and to another friend of mine from India, who is a partner in a big law firm here and has a lot of work to do too. You guys are doing way too much. Like it's a lot, right? And she said, I think you need to take a break. Maybe just do the writing now that it's sort of taking off and all of that. And I was smiling, and my friend from India was smiling. And yeah, because we were like, no, you have no idea. Right. And I again, I think it's where one comes to life from, and it's neither good nor bad nor anything. It's really just where one comes to, what your background is, what your motivations are, what drives you, and so on. So we're talking about Nwabulu, who is a housemaid, who began to be a housemaid at the age of 10. And then she begins to find, some kind of success. She's never going to just say, it's okay, I'm just going to take a break, I take a vacation and take a year off, right? Because, when you think about where she's coming from, it's not something that she can conceive of. And somebody with a lot more privilege might look at that as a prison, whereas she would view it from the perspective of freedom, from the perspective of this is the avenue to freedom. And that's never going, I'm never going to, others might look at it as hard work, as suffering. I look at it as my ticket out of.
Because her husband, like later in the book, when she has this successful fashion business, he encourages her to.
So she takes on the poultry, she does all these other things. Because she's, like I say in the book, she's not willing to make friends with poverty.
And do you feel like, I want to get into this more, but it does seem like what you've done advocacy around violence, like domestic violence with women, and also mental health, like appears very clearly in the book. Like it seems like another vessel for what you've been working with your whole life. And is the writing itself, like you were talking earlier about how you do it at whatever moment you can. You're also a mother. But I wonder, is the writing work? Because there's also so much pleasure here. There are so many moments with the food and the clothes. There's such sensuality. It's not that, and you're saying the two are not inextricable, but I wonder how you have conceived of it before this moment where.
I have to say it's an interesting question. I have all these causes that I champion and do and stuff, and it's interesting. There was no deliberate effort to do any agenda, and actually, forget about the conversation. It's first and foremost a story, because that's how I like to read my own books too. So it's first and foremost a story, but it was interesting to me that these things came out. And I think it's, you can't really divorce yourself 100% from the things that motivate you, the things that are near and dear to your heart, and so on. And I think that those found a way to come out in this book. But as I was explaining somewhere else, I think for me, the way I view my writing is really, it's a way of seeing life. Mm-hmm. So fortunately, I do law, and I have ways to maybe say, okay, I'm doing some work in, sexual violence or in domestic violence or whatever. And I really don't think about it that way when I come to my writing. But of course, it's sort of, these are the things that agitate me. These are the things that move me and upset me, or whatever it is, and we find ways to come out. And I think that's what happened with this book. But please, no agenda. Just read it. I think it's an entertaining story.
Yes.
Hopefully entertaining
Very
story.
much so.
First.
There's also there's so much is happening on every page. But at the center of it, there is like this deep grief that we wouldn't feel, without giving too much away, if there weren't so much love expressed throughout the book about this person who is attached to, and like there's love is expressed throughout the book at many moments. Like great love, great loss is what we feel when we're reading this. And I wondered if like what you learned through writing. I'll read a little bit. Is that okay?
Yes.
I should have marked.
Did you mark somewhere?
Yeah, the only true content person in Obiali's home was Tata, the baby. We called him Tata, the name for every newborn baby. His little cheeks filled up to bursting point with laughter whenever I picked him up. It was uncanny the way I made him laugh. And later on the same page, she says, I knew what she meant. I had been good with Ife, her first boy, my godson, and Uzoma, the younger one. But my attentions to Tata were extraordinary. He filled an emptiness in my heart. My mother was right. Children were the best things in life. There are like these moments throughout it that are just expressing this love, because you're speaking about it expressing things that preoccupy you, but also these other kinds of preoccupations. And I wondered like what you learned in writing about love.
Okay, I didn't think specifically that I was writing about love. I do think that I fell in love with my characters, which is, writers, they often say, they often say things that sometimes that really make sense. But, you create these people and they begin to feel like real people. I think what I learned, if I would put it that way, was, that we're all here trying to make the best of life. And what that means sometimes is that we hurt each other. What that means sometimes is that we hurt ourselves. And, that there's much more room for forgiveness than we would like to imagine sometimes. And yeah, I think that's what, people have said, no, there wasn't enough retribution, there was not enough revenge, and so on. And I have to say, I don't plot tightly. I don't really, I don't have what happened with this book really is that it took me sometimes in directions that I didn't really plan. And so I think it was in those moments that I really sort of picked up, if you call it the learning, that I did, or the observation, that we have much more maybe capacity for forgiveness than we sometimes give ourselves credit for. Some people have argued that wasn't the right thing, but you
like in
know.
Julie's marriage to Eugene, for instance, or later, later still. Yeah, when I was thinking about this question of love, I was like, there are these descriptions, like a familial love, of like the maternal love, especially, but like also desire, that are just so exuberant. But forgiveness is an interesting place. That's a very different, like what happens afterwards, which I thought was extremely grounded the book so deeply in like people's capacity for forgiveness. I see these characters who are experiencing so much challenge. Like I think there are a couple of books or places in the book where they just say like, oh look, like this person is hurting this person. Not that again. But like, yeah, there being a distance from it. But there's also something I noticed, because it's very much exploring patriarchy. And the lovers and husbands are kind of consistently disappointing, with the exception of Nwabulu. But the fathers and sons have this place of grace. Is that something you
That's
noticed?
interesting. Like when you ask these things, I want to go back and read the book. Yeah. I think I've heard that quite a bit. Not the fathers and sons things. That's actually a new one, really. But I think I will definitely own up to the fact that it's something that's very troubling for me. The level of patriarchy, I don't want to say misogyny, that remains prevalent. Sometimes is visceral and very obvious, and sometimes it's insidious, and you feel gaslighted as to whether you are imagining it or you are not. And and I think if there is one thing that was very, there are other things that come out in this book, but that's something that was very, I knew from going in was definitely going to come out, because it's something that is quite prevalent in where I come from. So I didn't set out to create. In fact, in the book I'm working on now, I'm sort of thinking about it and trying to be a little bit more deliberate about it, to say, we have good men. But the truth is, the society that I was describing is extremely patriarchal, and I don't actually, and I don't think people think about it from a completely negative perspective. So, for example, the idea that we need sons to perpetuate families is something that is, in fact, I ask myself if we would have an Igbo culture, and I'm an Igbo woman, without that, because you want families to continue, you want bloodlines to continue, you want a sense of history and a sense of culture. And the question that I ask is whether this needs to be on the back, on women's backs, right? Where do we fit in when that is the case? Or what is taken away from us?
Yes, is the key.
Yes. And when you think about that, how does it filter into other things that are not just about culture and land and so on, but about, how we live in society and how we treat each other, and how we live in relationships, and how we live in marriages, and things like that. And I think the book is not at all didactic. I don't think. I think there's a lot of room for reflection and disagreement and so on and so forth. But it's just something, that is I think, at least in certain parts of the world, we need to think about very closely. So, for example, we're talking about what has now happened in Afghanistan, and I can't help thinking about how women there are surviving. That's just, and some of the things that I describe here, no woman, most women, and I'm this has made me really happy. Most Igbo women who have read this book have not disagreed at all. It is, this is what we live and face every day, even when we talk about the different kinds of violence, physical, sexual, emotional, that go on. These are things that people still live with today. It's not, it's not historical at all.
Yeah, so, in large part, it's set in the 70s. Like what was the decision there, and do you feel that anything has shifted
between the 70s and now?
Yeah,
because things have shifted.
Yeah,
they've just not shifted as much as we want.
Yeah. And that's what you're hearing reflected back to you.
Yes.
And when you talk, What would the distinction between patriarchy and misogyny be for you? It's like that there's
That's like a PhD thesis.
yeah.
I think that to say that there are two sides of the same coin would be a bit simplistic, but there might be some level of truth to that. I think of patriarchy as just the understanding that, you know, a certain gender is, you know, superior, is in a position to lead. Sometimes, you know, there might be arguments about whether it's superior or just in a position to lead, in a position to move the world forward in a certain way. And I'm trying to to pick my words carefully and be deliberately mild about what I'm saying. Whereas misogyny is more, and, a hatred, a dislike, an antagonism for the female gender. Explicitly. So, but you can see how, if you think that there's a gender that's, to take on more responsibility, because some men would look at it, especially in where I come from, where, we associate men with provision, we're here, we're working very hard. And I hear this a lot actually now, in social media, where people say, men are being thrown under the bus. We do everything we can to keep families, to provide. We break our backs trying to do things. So I don't understand why, the thing is, it's just like you're working for somebody who you don't actually see. You're completely blind to who they are, the power they carry, what they need, what they want. You understand? So, sometimes it's you want to try to explain that and say that I want to be seen, and there are so many ways. I tell men. I mean, I do other work. So recently, I did this country gender profile for Nigeria for the EU. And it was shocking how bad it was. You look at literacy rates, you look at employment levels, you look at political participation. I mean, the political participation one, I think, is just so blatant, right? It's for us and in many other countries, not just African countries, but countries around the world. You look at how many women are in parliament or in the legislature, how many women have led countries or are in any way, shape or form close to leading countries. And you have to ask yourself, is it because women are less intelligent? I mean, we kind of need to take it back to those basics. Somebody like my dad, who is, whom I would maybe describe as a feminist, would say, I don't understand what the complaints are. And I say, it's so easy. Let me give you an example. In Saudi Arabia, they couldn't drive they only started driving when? 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And yeah, that's normal in the 21st century, just a car. So, and then in other countries, it's more subtle. It's a question of degree, but you can't deny the evidence of your own eyes.
So you mean you question? It's not you that is questioning women's intelligence.
I think it's everybody that should question it,
Perseverance? I mean, I think it's the question of controlling.
Yes.
Controlling reproduction. Because, I mean, that's
there is that too. I don't know if it's just a question of reproduction. I think it's much broader than that. We like to center things there, but I think I think all of it feeds into, and that's the point I'm trying to make, really, that once you have that patriarchal construct, then every other thing, whether you're talking about reproduction or you're talking about political participation or you're talking about women going to work in Afghanistan or going to school, yeah, because somebody else has gone to school in those places and is leading those places and is saying to the women there, look, we're going to take care of you. But that's the point. You're not seeing me. You don't know what I want. You're not, you don't think that that I just came into the world same way you did. And, anyway, sorry, I might be too. Yeah. And it is, in some places it's blatant and, some of the things that I'm talking about would be, we would say in Canada, that's not really,
do you think this?
But it may be more subtle, but those are the things that we keep dealing with.
What is like the story that's set in the 70s? Because you're like very much introducing me to that like time in Nigeria. Like, it could easily happen now. It could happen in many places. Do you think?
I don't think things have changed as much as I think. So, for example, Julie is worried that she's not married. She's in her 30s. It's still very much a thing for us in certain parts of Nigeria.
But maybe more overt in the 70s.
Now perhaps one might have more choices. Social media might make it more possible for you to see other people that are living differently, and therefore, but that doesn't mean it's not concerning. It's just a little less,
So as a result of this, I'm thinking about the relationships between women in the book, because like you're saying, there are women who are so hurt that they're perpetuating a lot of pain. But there's also this too really central. Each of the protagonists has a friend who drives their lives almost. Like each has a friend who changes the course of their lives. And do you want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, so I think one of the things I was hoping to accomplish with this book is nuance, right? Looking at those female friendships and how they help the protagonists deal with life and so on. So that happens. Friendships are a wonderful thing, are a good thing, and sometimes you hear this thing about women are the worst, women's worst enemies. We don't, at least maybe in my part of the world, you hear that quite a bit. And that's not true, really. It really isn't. So, there are all kinds of people in this book: good women, bad women, people making terrible choices, whatever. Right? We're just human. That's it. That's what I want us to get from it.
Absolutely. I just noticed that parallel.
Yeah.
And then also that they both did have fathers who were like incredible sources of strength. Like who persisted.
It's so interesting. The kinds of things.
I want
some of those choices weren't deliberate. So when people point it out to me, I actually have to go back and and think about it. I've had an incredible dad, and I think maybe so. When I hear that, I'm like, maybe that's what's coming out. Maybe that's what's coming out. But it's interesting.
This is one of my favorite passages, and I just want to read it. Or maybe you want to read it?
No, go ahead.
and hear your thoughts on it. So this is later in the book, and Julie says, "It is important for a woman to have a life, I heard my mother say in my head. It is most important for a woman to have children, but she must have a life outside of her children because one day they will grow up or refuse to grow up. Either way, they will still leave you." I smiled. My mother had never really said that, never really said anything beyond the fact that a woman must have children to be called a woman. But whenever anything like a nugget of wisdom popped into my head, I attributed it by force of habit to that quiet force of nature I had called mother. I love, there are three things in there. The leaving of children, but then her feeling like she has to assign it to her mother, who never did that. And she's almost enjoying watching herself do that too.
I don't know. I don't know what to say to that. I don't know what to say to that, except that does happen, right? Where we idolize someone and we imagine that we imagine what they would say to us. Yes, we can take ownership of our own thoughts, our own ideas, and our own motivations, but whether that always happens is, well, it doesn't always happen.
Both like Julie and Nwabulu are so solitary at certain points. Like there's loneliness. Like they both talk about their loneliness at different points, and therefore like so resilient. So it's almost like it's like calling forth allies when there are none, or something. Maybe that's happening. I just thought, even also like the idea where she's been like so attached to her children and thinking, just giving herself, finding a way to give herself advice to let them have some space. It was really it was really something. So you're writing another novel.
Yeah.
When you find the time. There is a sense that I haven't experienced an ending like this in a really long time in a novel. Like it's not only like satisfying, there's a sense that these lives continue. Like we spent so much time with two lives, and it doesn't sound like you're staying with these characters, but I wondered about whether you what you're carrying forward from The Son of the House.
Okay, that's a question I get all the time in different ways. I've been asked if there's a sequel. I've been told that the ending is unsatisfactory, and I've been told that was wicked, and I find it very complimentary, to be honest, to think that people spend time with these characters and they kind of want to continue in a manner of speaking with them. I think no, I'm not taking them on at all. Not at this point. Maybe in 10 years, maybe who knows? But no, when I ended it, actually, it ended beyond this, beyond what I have. Okay. And my editor got to this point and just ruled the line and said the end. And I remember, we had different disagreements about different things, and, I overruled different things. But I got to that and I said, I think it's a disciplined ending. And it's an ending that allows us to imagine for ourselves whatever we think, is the ending, and so on. So no, I'm not. If anything, I want to leave them behind completely. As I work on this other book,
you tour the book,
I think that definitely some of the themes are things that exercise my mind, that make me think. Some of the themes around patriarchy, but also around class divides. And even friendship are things that I might carry on in some way, but the hope is it will be completely different. In terms of story, at least.
There's a lot of reaching across class divides. And I wondered if you would say more about that.
Okay.
I think with Fiorena, and then later when they meet, when the two meet.
So many areas, of class divisions. I think that's how I grew up, right? That's so. For example, I grew up having people working with us in our homes, which is not common in Canada at all, and people being big men and big women, as we say in Nigeria, and others being not big anything. Drivers driving senior civil servants. So my dad had a driver when I was growing up, and he was a senior civil servant. And that was just it. But I know that as I grew up, I remember, becoming friends with many of the help who were my age, and then all of a sudden learning that they had left, maybe because they did something that the madam didn't like or whatever. And it is still the case today. It hasn't changed.
Because it's domestic.
It
So
hasn't
that's where
changed at all. And there are different, it's not that we do it to be mean or whatever. But the idea is, as just as a young person, as a child, I always wondered, some of them had really young people. And so we were like, where are their parents? Where are their, and that was just, again, I talked about frame of reference. That's just the way it was. It wasn't good or bad or anything else. It was just the way it was. And some people would bring their relatives who were poorer to live with them, to send them to school in exchange for them doing chores and so on. And I mean, even today, I wonder, could we live in a more equal society? What would that look like? I remember going to Cape Town. No, I'm going too far. I remember coming to school in Halifax and seeing people begging on the streets and being completely taken aback by that, because here we are where one is coming from what is called the third world country. You're coming to the first world country where everybody's going to be rich and live in a big house, and then you find that you get there and there are people who are homeless and there are people who are so I remember walking on the streets with one of my friends who is also Nigerian Canadian. And I gave some money to somebody who was asking for money. And he said to me, "What are you doing? This is a glorious country. They have everything. They just don't want to pull themselves up and do anything. You know where we're coming from, and you know what that looks like, And, I've thought about that for years, actually. But the truth is, it's in every society you have people who are struggling, and for whatever reason, and there must be a way to make things a bit better.
I
It's
was
just,
thinking, absolutely, I was thinking about, the closeness, but when you're, of course, being in the home together, that's
yes,
inevitable.
exactly. So, you think about, so you're a help in a house. So, somebody was asking me about home, the idea of home. Yesterday we were talking at the Between the Pages event, and we talked about the idea of home. And what struck me when I was growing up is you are a help in these houses, and it's not your home. You live there, you're in intimate relations, but you can be sent away at any time, and yeah, it must be terrible and difficult to live like that. Like I said, it's not didactic. Please read it. We have these conversations that are philosophical. But yeah.
I wanted to talk about some of your endeavors. So I was thinking there are these links through the book. I feel like there are these portraits of mental health, there's kind of obsessive compulsive disorder, PTSD.
Yeah.
And
not many people have picked that up, actually. So many of the reviews, So that was interesting that you picked that up.
Yeah. I mean, this work that you do, I know you say, well, this is my work, so it preoccupies me, but that would speak very much to just a concern for. They're very compassionate. Even she wonders with Emma, the miser, there's something wrong here that's not coming from within him, and that seems to be what your law practice revolves around, what your advocacy works around, what people cannot help that is within them. And I wonder where that comes from, if you have thoughts about that.
I think it comes from, I'm sure, many different places. I have family members that live with mental health issues, so it's very personal to me. but I also, through my work, have met people. So, for example, in our work in decriminalizing attempted suicide, you find many people who've just had maybe not even, long-term clinical depression or anything, just a very traumatic event that, that happened to them and so on. And you feel like there must be a way we can live in a better society that is more caring, because these things happen to people. It might be grief, it might be a broken relationship, it might be the loss of some life, it might be the loss of a job in a very difficult economic situation, and all of that. And for me, as a lawyer, for example, the answer cannot be let's lock you up because we think life is sacred. If life is sacred, then we have to do what we can to, support people to have better lives. Sorry if it sounds a bit moralistic and whatever, but, it is what it is. It does happen. For all in the book, so it's interesting that you pick up on the OCD, for example, which nobody has mentioned, and it's very interesting to me. And of course, what happened after the Biafran War, lots of people went through trauma. Some dealt with it by just moving on and powering through, which is what we do and which is what this book is about. We power through. But there are people who are not able to power through, and we have to see those people.
Julie's brother as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so on. So, so I am grateful, if anything, to have read law now, because that gives me the opportunity to actually do some work beyond what I might do in fiction, in terms of policy, in terms of law reform, to change things. Fiction, I think, is extremely important. Telling stories, getting people to see things that differently, maybe things that they would not see from a very frontal attack, maybe in a more subtle way. I don't know if it works, but yeah, you gotta try.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Cheluchi.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was very insightful.